He threw the cake in her face, laughing as he humiliated her in front of their friends. But within moments, his smirk faded. What she did next left everyone speechless and changed their marriage forever. Lisa stood in the dim glow of the kitchen, smoothing out the last swirl of frosting on the birthday cake. The air was filled with laughter and the distant clinking of glasses as their guests mingled in the living room. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, Marcus's birthday, a night of joy. But deep down, Lisa knew better. She had spent the whole day preparing, making sure everything was perfect. The decorations, the food, even the playlist, everything curated to make her husband happy. And yet, there was a tightness in her chest, a lingering tension that had become all too familiar. From across the room, a friend whispered to another, their eyes darting toward Lisa. "She looks exhausted," one of them muttered. "Does she even work? Marcus takes care of everything." The words stung, but Lisa had learned to keep her silence. Let them think what they wanted. Marcus, her husband, was the center of attention as always. Charming, laughing loudly, his presence commanding the room. He was the provider, the man who always reminded Lisa that without him, she'd be nothing. She had heard those words too many times before. "Lisa, sweetheart, you got the bills sorted this month, right?" His voice cut through the air suddenly, casual but pointed. The conversations in the room dimmed as people turned their heads. Lisa froze for a moment, her fingers gripping the edge of the cake tray. She knew this game. He always did this, throwing subtle jabs at her in public, making sure everyone knew who held the power in their marriage. "Not yet," she admitted quietly. Marcus let out a dramatic sigh, shaking his head with a smirk. "Of course not. I swear, I do everything around here." A few guests chuckled awkwardly, while others looked away, embarrassed for her. A younger woman near the bar, a friend of Marcus's from work, leaned in closer to him. "You really put up with a lot, huh?" she teased, batting her lashes. Lisa clenched her jaw. She knew that woman. She knew the way Marcus acted around her. But she also knew that Marcus wouldn't humiliate her this openly. At least, she had thought so. A server passed by, offering champagne. Lisa reached for a glass, needing something, anything to ease the weight pressing against her ribs. As she took a sip, she caught sight of Marcus watching her, his smirk widening. "You know," he continued, "sometimes I wonder what you even do all day." A few people laughed again, this time more freely. They were comfortable with this, with her being the punchline. Lisa forced a smile. "I make sure you have a home to come back to," she said smoothly. Marcus raised an eyebrow, amused. "Right. A home I pay for." Her grip tightened around the stem of the glass. Across the room, an older guest, a distant cousin of Marcus's, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes narrowing slightly as he watched the exchange. He was one of the few people who had ever questioned Marcus's treatment of Lisa, but even he remained silent now. Lisa exhaled slowly, placing her drink down. "Dinner is ready," she announced, turning toward the dining table. It was the only way to end this moment before it spiraled further. But she didn't realize that the worst was yet to come. As she walked past Marcus, he suddenly reached for the cake. Before she could react, she felt the cold, sticky frosting collide with her face. Gasps filled the room. Laughter erupted from a few corners, but most guests were stunned into silence. Lisa stood there, frozen, the sweet scent of vanilla and buttercream filling her nose. The weight of the cake slid down her cheek, onto her dress. The room felt impossibly still. Marcus, unfazed, leaned back with a satisfied grin. "Maybe next time you'll remember to do your part." A hush fell over the guests. No one dared to move. No one dared to speak. But Lisa simply wiped the frosting from her face, her expression unreadable. And in that moment, the air shifted, because Marcus had no idea what was coming next. The laughter died almost as quickly as it started. A thick, suffocating silence settled over the room, stretching between Lisa and Marcus like an invisible chasm. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some exchanging nervous glances, others staring at their drinks as if they hadn't just witnessed a man publicly humiliate his wife. Lisa didn't move. The frosting dripped from her chin onto the front of her dress, a slow, deliberate rhythm that echoed in her mind. She wiped a hand across her cheek, smearing the icing further, her fingers trembling, but not from shock, from something far more dangerous. Marcus leaned back in his chair, chuckling as he reached for his whiskey. "Come on, Lisa," he drawled, tilting his glass lazily. "It's a joke. Lighten up." A few people chuckled hesitantly, eager to dissolve the tension, but the discomfort in the room was palpable. Lisa's hand curled into a fist at her side. A joke. That's what he called it. She could still feel the weight of the cake against her skin, the stickiness clinging to her like a second layer of humiliation. But it wasn't just the cake. It was everything. Every comment. Every reminder that he was the one in control. Every time he had chipped away at her dignity, piece by piece, in public, in private, until she had started to believe she was nothing without him. Marcus exhaled heavily, rolling his eyes. "See? This is exactly the problem, babe. You take everything so damn seriously. Maybe if you actually contributed something around here." The words barely left his mouth before Lisa moved. With an eerie calmness, she reached across the table, picked up his half-finished glass of whiskey, and poured it out. Slowly, deliberately, onto the remains of the ruined cake in front of her. The amber liquid soaked into the frosting, pooling at the edges, darkening the pristine white. The entire room stilled. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Lisa," he warned, his voice lower now, his amusement flickering into something else. But she wasn't finished. She placed the empty glass down with a quiet clink, then lifted her gaze to meet his, her expression unreadable. "You're right," she murmured, her voice as smooth as silk. "I should contribute more." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "What the hell does that mean?" Lisa inhaled slowly, savoring the moment. Then, with deliberate precision, she reached into the small clutch purse resting on the counter beside her. The guests held their breath as she pulled out a single folded envelope and slid it across the table toward him. Marcus stared at it, confused. "What is this?" Lisa didn't answer. She simply leaned back, watching him with a patience that made his skin prickle. A strange, sinking feeling crept into Marcus's stomach as he picked up the envelope, tearing it open with one swift motion. His eyes scanned the paper inside, once, twice, before his entire face drained of color. Divorce papers. A sharp gasp cut through the air. Marcus's fingers tightened around the edges of the document, his entire body stiffening as the reality set in. "You're kidding," he said, a humorless laugh bubbling up. He looked up at her, searching her face for some sign that this was a joke, that she was bluffing. But Lisa only smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "You wanted me to contribute," she said softly, tilting her head. "So I did." The weight of her words hit him like a freight train. The guests watched in stunned silence, no longer just passive observers in his usual game of dominance. No, this was different. Lisa had flipped the script, and now it was Marcus who was scrambling to keep up, his hands curled into fists. "You think you're just going to walk away from this?" His voice was lower now, quieter, but there was an edge of desperation beneath the anger. Lisa arched a brow, completely unfazed. "I don't think, Marcus," she murmured. "I know." Marcus's breathing quickened. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Lisa was supposed to be weak. She was supposed to take it. That's what she always did. Not tonight. Tonight, she had taken back control. One of Marcus's friends shifted awkwardly in his seat, finally breaking the thick silence. Maybe we should—" "No one's leaving," Marcus snapped, standing up so abruptly that his chair scraped against the floor with a loud screech. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his fingers tightening around the divorce papers like they might disintegrate in his grasp. Lisa remained seated, completely at ease, as if his outburst was nothing more than a child's tantrum, and that only enraged him more. "You think you can just end this?" His voice dropped, dripping with disbelief. "You have nothing without me. You are nothing without me." Lisa's eyes darkened. Slowly, deliberately, she rose to her feet, lifting her chin, meeting his gaze without an ounce of fear. "You keep telling yourself that," she whispered. Then, without another word, she turned away from him, walking calmly, steadily, as the room parted, like waves around her. Marcus stood there, gripping the divorce papers so tightly, his knuckles turned white. His jaw clenched, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. The room was silent, every guest frozen in the awkward tension, hanging thick in the air. Lisa, however, moved with an unsettling calm. She adjusted the strap of her dress, wiped the last remnants of frosting from her cheek, and stepped past Marcus, as if he no longer existed. But Marcus wasn't done. Not yet. "You think you can just walk away from me?" His voice was quieter this time, but there was a dangerous edge to it. Lisa didn't stop. Marcus's pride burned hotter than the whiskey he had been sipping all night. He had controlled this marriage, controlled her, for years. And now, in front of all these people, his friends, his colleagues, even that smug cousin of his, she was making a fool of him. He refused to let that happen. "Lisa," he snapped, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. She paused, just for a moment, then turned back to face him. Her expression remained unreadable, but her eyes held something he had never seen before, something that made his stomach twist. "You're overreacting," he said, forcing a chuckle, trying to regain his footing. "We're just having a little fun here, right?" Lisa tilted her head, studying him, as if he were a stranger. "A little fun," she repeated slowly, tasting the words. "Yeah," he insisted, nodding toward the guests as if to get them on his side. "I mean, come on. Everyone knows I was joking. You're not seriously mad about a little cake, are you?" The tension in the room thickened. Lisa let out a soft laugh, but it wasn't amusement. It was something colder, something final. "You still don't get it, do you?" she murmured. Marcus frowned. "Get what?" Lisa took a slow step forward, closing the space between them. She didn't yell. She didn't raise her voice, but the quiet power in her tone sent a chill down his spine. "This isn't about the cake," she said. "It never was." The guests, still pretending not to listen, leaned in ever so slightly. Lisa continued, her voice steady, unwavering. "This is about every time you made me feel small. Every time you turned me into a joke so you could feel big. Every time I smiled through the humiliation because I thought—" She exhaled, shaking her head. "Because I thought that's what love was supposed to look like." Something in Marcus flickered, a shadow of uncertainty, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "Come on, Lisa," he scoffed. "You're blowing this out of proportion." She smiled again, but this time It was pitying. "No, Marcus," she said. "I'm finally seeing things exactly as they are." The shift was almost imperceptible, but it was there. The realization creeping into Marcus's mind, the weight of it settling into his bones. Lisa wasn't bluffing. He was losing her, and not just her, his control, his image, his power. Panic started to creep in. All right, he said, raising his hands as if to calm her down. "Let's not do anything drastic here. You're upset. I get it. But don't you think you should at least talk to me before making a decision like this?" Lisa arched a brow. "Talk to you?" "Yeah," he said, forcing a smile, like a rational adult. Something flickered in Lisa's expression, and for the first time that night, she looked genuinely amused. "A rational adult," she repeated, nodding slowly. "You mean like the kind of adult who throws a cake at his wife in front of an entire room of people?" Marcus's face darkened. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone coughed awkwardly. Marcus was losing control of the narrative. Lisa took another step forward. "You want to talk now? Now, when the power dynamic isn't in your favor anymore? When I finally get a say in how this plays out?" His jaw tightened. "Lisa, don't do this." "Don't do what?" she cut in. "Don't finally stand up for myself? Don't embarrass you?" She shook her head, exhaling sharply. "God, Marcus, if you're embarrassed, that's on you. I spent years shrinking myself so you could feel bigger. But I'm done playing small." Silence, thick and heavy. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. A soft ding broke the tension, the sound of Lisa's phone. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, then smiled. Perfect timing, she mused. Marcus frowned. "Who's that?" Lisa didn't answer. Instead, she turned toward the front door just as it swung open. A man in a tailored suit stepped inside, his presence commanding immediate attention. Sharp jawline, professional demeanor. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who was very used to handling business. Lisa greeted him with an easy nod. "Thanks for coming on such short notice." The man barely spared Marcus a glance before pulling out a sleek folder. "Everything's ready," he said smoothly. Marcus's stomach dropped. Lisa took the folder, flipping through the pages with practiced ease. "Marcus," she said without looking up, "meet my lawyer." The gasp that followed was almost deafening. Marcus's face twisted into something ugly. "Your lawyer?" Lisa finally met his eyes, and for the first time in years, there was nothing hesitant, nothing afraid in her gaze. "Yes," she said simply. Marcus took a step back, his mind racing. He wasn't in control anymore. He wasn't the one calling the shots. And Lisa? Lisa was walking away, not just from him, from the version of herself that had spent too long believing she wasn't enough, from the silence, from the shame, from everything he had convinced her she could never escape. Marcus opened his mouth, desperate for something, anything, to say that would undo this. But before he could speak, Lisa turned to the lawyer. "Let's finalize everything tonight." And with that, she walked out the door, leaving Marcus standing there, drowning in the wreckage of the life he had built on the foundation of his own arrogance. Marcus felt the world tilting beneath him. His mouth went dry, his grip tightening around the crumpled divorce papers as Lisa turned her back to him, speaking to her lawyer with an ease that made his stomach churn. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She was supposed to cry, to beg, to crumble under his words like she always did. Not this, not walking away. His breath came in short, shallow bursts. He had to regain control. "Lisa," he said, voice strained, forced. "You're not thinking straight." Lisa turned to face him, her expression calm, almost too calm. "Oh, I'm thinking very clearly, Marcus. A few guests started to inch toward the door, sensing the inevitable implosion about to unfold. But others stayed, transfixed, watching a man who had always dominated the room suddenly find himself powerless. Marcus let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. So that's it? You're leaving? You're seriously going to throw away everything over a little cake? Lisa tilted her head, a small smirk playing at the corner of her lips. Marcus, let me make something very clear. She took a step toward him, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. I didn't decide to leave tonight. I decided the first time you made me feel like I wasn't enough. The color drained from Marcus's face. Lisa continued, her voice unwavering. But I stayed. I stayed because I thought I could fix it. Because I thought if I worked hard enough, loved hard enough, you'd finally see me. She let out a soft, bitter laugh. But you never did. And you never would. Marcus's fingers twitched. Lisa. She held up a hand, stopping him cold. And you know the irony? She mused. For years, you told me I was nothing without you, that I had nothing without you. Her smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. But here's the truth, Marcus. She reached into her purse and pulled out another envelope. This one sleek, black, embossed with gold lettering. She tossed it onto the table. It slid toward Marcus, stopping just inches from his trembling fingers. Open it, she said. Marcus hesitated, then ripped the envelope open. His eyes scanned the first few lines of the letter inside, and as he read, his face contorted into something almost unrecognizable. His voice was barely a whisper. What is this? Lisa folded her arms. My new contract. The room collectively inhaled. A contract? Marcus repeated, stunned. With who? Lisa smiled, savoring the moment. With a firm that actually recognizes my value. His breath hitched. You told everyone I didn't contribute, that I didn't work, she said, her voice softer now, almost pitying. But what you never realized is that I chose to let you think that. Marcus's hands trembled as he flipped through the contract, his eyes darting across the words. A multi-million-dollar partnership, a position in an elite firm. Lisa, his Lisa, had been securing her future while he had been too busy tearing her down. You. Marcus swallowed, his throat dry. You planned this. Lisa met his gaze, unwavering. You planned my humiliation. I planned my escape. Marcus exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Lisa, this is crazy. You can't just... I already did, she interrupted. He blinked. I signed the contract yesterday, she continued. I have my own money now, my own home, my own life. And you? You have nothing to hold over me anymore. Marcus staggered back, as if she had physically struck him. The power had shifted. He could feel it slipping through his fingers like sand, and no matter how desperately he tried to grasp at it, Lisa was already gone. The room was utterly silent. Then Lisa let out a quiet breath, as if releasing years of weight from her shoulders. She reached for her coat, slipping it on with effortless grace. You always wanted to be the man in control, Marcus. But tonight, the only person left under your thumb is you. She turned, walking toward the door. Marcus could barely think, barely breathe. This wasn't just a loss. This was his loss, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Marcus stood motionless, his face a mask of disbelief as Lisa reached for the doorknob. The reality of the situation crashed down on him like a tidal wave. This wasn't a fight he could win. This wasn't one of his cruel jokes that she would brush off. This was real. The guests, once captivated by his dominance, now avoided his gaze. They had witnessed his downfall, and none of them wanted to be caught in the wreckage. Lisa, wait, Marcus blurted out, desperation creeping into his voice. He stepped forward, reaching out as if he could physically stop her from leaving. "We can talk about this. You don't have to do this." Lisa turned, her expression unreadable. But there was no hesitation in her movements, no second-guessing in her eyes. "I already did, Marcus," she said simply. Her lawyer, standing by the doorway, nodded respectfully. "All that's left is your signature," he said, glancing at Marcus. "I'd recommend you take some time to review it, but from the looks of things, you don't have much of a choice." Marcus's fingers twitched, his ego warring with the cold truth. For years he had painted Lisa as dependent, as weak. But now, standing before him, she was neither. She was free. The silence stretched unbearably long until, finally, Lisa let out a small sigh. "I don't hate you, Marcus," she admitted. "I just finally love myself more than I loved proving my worth to you." And with that, she walked out the door. The moment it closed behind her, the weight of his loss settled deep into Marcus's bones. The murmurs started, quiet at first, then louder. Someone let out a low whistle. A few guests exchanged glances before awkwardly shuffling toward the exit, their excuses mumbled under their breath. No one wanted to stay in the aftermath of his destruction. Marcus sat down heavily in his chair, staring at the untouched whiskey glass before him. For the first time in his life, there was no one left to laugh at his jokes, no one left to take the fall, no one left but him. The night air was crisp as Lisa stepped outside, inhaling deeply. The weight she had carried for years, the silent battles, the quiet humiliations, was gone. For the first time in a long time, she felt light. She glanced at her lawyer, who gave her an approving nod. "You handled that well," he said. Lisa let out a soft chuckle. "Took me long enough." As she walked toward her car, she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. A single notification blinked on the screen. A message from an old friend, one she had lost touch with over the years. "Proud of you. You finally chose you." Lisa smiled. Yes. Yes, she did. She slid into the driver's seat, took one last look at the house behind her, the house that was no longer hers, then started the engine. No anger, no regret, just peace. Because some endings aren't losses, they're beginnings. Back inside, Marcus sat alone, staring at the contract Lisa had left behind. The realization was slow, painful. The power he had held over her, gone. The woman he had belittled, stronger than ever. And for the first time in his life, Marcus had no one to blame but himself. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment below. Have you ever had to walk away from something or someone to find your worth? Let's talk about it. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You never know who might need to hear this today.